So today we're going to talk about doing a kitchen still life with objects that you might find in your kitchen. And this is going to be actually a two-part video. I'm going to start off right now with talking about composition and also about the best way to do cylinders, ellipses, and two-point perspective boxes, because the chances are very good you're going to come up with some man-made objects that will require knowing how to do that. So the first thing is to look around your kitchen and see if you can come up with some ideas of something that would interest you or be an interesting drawing. The final drawing can be whatever you want as far as medium, but I'm going to use the Pitt pen and watercolor to do my final drawing, and I think that's a fun way to do it. But if you want to do just plain graphite pencil, or if you'd like to do colored pencil, or a combination of watercolor and colored pencil, whatever you feel like is fun. It doesn't have to be super realistic. I am going to encourage you to end up doing a border of some kind on it, and that'll just give it a little nice graphic touch. So this is one that it's not really a kitchen one, but it's one I did last quarter, or maybe in the last fall quarter, for example. And the subject was, I think, I can't even remember what the subject was, to tell you the truth, but it was, I ended up doing a bar of soap and a pump thing of liquid soap, hand soap. So that was my subject. The first thing I did was find the objects that I might want to use, and I took some different photos of possible compositions. So playing around with the viewpoint. Are you going to be looking down more or more from the side? And when I took it outdoors, I saw some really nice cast shadows depending on the time of day. If it's, in this case, I think it was early morning, so I got some long shadows from the east. And then I turned it around and went the other direction. So you see, in this case, there's a cylindrical object and a box-like object. So those can be kind of tricky with the perspective and the cylinder. So the first thing I wanted to do on this was to do what I've talked about before, is thumbnail sketches. So you just kind of scribble your components. So there's the pump bottle of hand soap, there's the bar, there's the washcloth. Where am I going to put those things? And is there going to be cast shadows? So you just take a minute and do small thumbnail size sketches. Are you going to do it horizontal, square, vertical? And you kind of work out some details. This should take you no more than a couple minutes to do. And then when you feel like you've got a sense of where the placement is going to be, is the tall thing going to be in the middle or off to the left or whatever, then you have an idea of where you're going from there. So here's, this was the subject of a coffee cup or coffee. And so all kinds of possibilities, coffee or tea. And here's that box-like structure and a cylinder again. Are you going to have the coffee cup on a plate underneath? Is there going to be a cast shadow, or is it going to be indoors or in low light? I guess this was outdoors, but it was in low light. It was under an awning, so there was shade. And here's one, a different box-like subject. So the box and the cylinder kept recurring over and over. How are you going to make that? So we'll take a look at that. The other thing is, when you're playing around with your composition, think about those composition principles of unity, variety, focal point, balance, all of those things. So here's a composition. It's a kitchen composition of a cutting board, and an orange. Okay, and nothing wrong with that. It's a blue cutting board and an orange, so I'm getting complementary colors. But how can I make this more interesting? Well, I can add a third element, and I think I mentioned in the assignment to take at least 3 objects. So by putting in that third object, now if I put it horizontal and everything's just straight across, it's not quite as dynamic as if I add a diagonal. And so what if I added this diagonal like that? So it becomes just a little bit more interesting. And now we're getting into 2-point perspective, where the corner is the closest thing to us and it's going off in 2 different directions. The other possibility here is that this side that I don't usually cut on is a little cleaner. So here's a round object, but what if I cut it? So now I have a little variety to the shapes or the forms. And what if I did it again? Makes me want to eat that orange. So now I have even more possibilities. And if I took it outdoors or where there was a strong light, I'd get different kinds of cast shadows. Now it's starting to tell a little bit more of a story. So you see how you can manipulate your subjects. And that's again why you don't just want to go on the internet and pick a picture of something that somebody else took. You want to really purposely manipulate whatever it is you're doing. Okay, kind of like the outdoor still life in a way. Okay, I'm going to put this aside, and it smells so good, those oranges. Okay, so we have the cylinder and the box. And I'm going to be featuring these in my subject because I decided to do a chocolate chip cookie baking story. So I'm going to put out a lot of the ingredients that you would use to make chocolate chip cookies. So a lot of you who were in my class before have seen this, and I put it on as an attachment onto the Google Classroom for this coming week. So to get a cylinder that doesn't tilt and doesn't look weird, I suggest, so if we were doing this bowl or this cottage cheese container or this coffee cup, the first thing you might want to do is a vertical. So let's take this cottage cheese container or ricotta cheese container that I'm going to use for my water bowl. And it's sitting straight up and down on the table. It's not lying on its side like a bottle, a soda bottle or something that would be lying on its side. So the configuration is vertical. So the first thing I want to do is draw vertical. Now, how am I going to know if it's vertical? Check with the side of your paper. And if it's lining up with the side of your paper, then it's vertical. Okay? Now, then we have this opening here, and depending on from what view you're looking at it, that opening is no longer a circle. It's a squish circle, or what we call an ellipse. So the more you see it from a side viewpoint, and I'm not sure how we're seeing this from the camera up there, but you can see it right here. We're seeing this from the side, so it's going to be what we call an ellipse or a squish circle. So we're getting here the vertical axis of the cylinder itself, but then the ellipse has an axis also. It actually has 2 axes, but the main axis is the horizontal axis. So we've got an axis like this and an axis of the cylinder itself. These 2 axes will always be perpendicular or at right angles to each other. So the first thing I might want to do if I'm drawing this bowl is to draw this axis of this ellipse. Now, back up a minute, and I think if you're new at this, and if you have trouble with cylinders, you ought to do a page in your sketchbook or on a piece of scratch paper of ellipses. You got to know what an ellipse is and what it isn't. It doesn't have pointy edges like a football. It isn't fatter on one side and skinnier on the other side like an egg. And it isn't a rectangle that's just got rounded off corners. So it is a continuous curve. So if I start thinking about it like this, that's an ellipse. I can have a fatter ellipse, and I like to go around it a couple times just so I'm getting that sense of the ellipse, or a more squished ellipse. And that would be the top of a cylinder. Okay, so going back to this, I want to put, and depending on the angle that I'm looking at, if I'm looking at it more from the top, it's going to be a fatter ellipse. This will be the center. And what it does is that axis divides it into two perfect halves. There's also a vertical axis that divides this into two equal halves. So it's not skinnier on one side. So you get these 4 quadrants that it's been divided up into. So I'm going to see if I can do, and I'm kind of getting my hand going like this. If you go real slow, you kind of have more trouble with it. So I think that's pretty good. And then I'm going to do the sides. And the idea being that this half should equal exactly that half. Now, what about the bottom of it? It's sitting on a flat table, so our first left brain gut reaction is to make it straight because we know it's on a flat table. But if you really look at that, it's a curve. So what it'll have is the same curve that this has, because this is really another ellipse down here, but part of it's being, you can't see all of it because it's covered up. So now if you do that vertical and horizontal, it'll keep you from having this sort of thing happening, or this sort of thing happening. But more often than not, you know, if somebody's putting something on a, like a cutting board, the tendency is to think that this is going to be tilted too. And it really isn't. It's going to be straight up and down unless it's actually tilted. And more often than not, it isn't. So that's the cylinder and ellipse. And I went through the steps. So again, I have this on the Google Classroom, this document. I think I did a photo of it and attached it. Now let's talk about, oh, one other thing. If you have a cylinder, a cylinder, and it's got some kind of lettering or stripes around it, the lettering on this ricotta cheese or whatever, let's look at this stripe right here. It says fat-free cottage cheese. What you'd want to do is have that same curve again. So this curve, and this curve all follow the same curve. And so I would do some little guidelines and do the lettering. Now, here's a rule for perspective and cylinders. If it's vertical in real life, like the axis of the bowl itself, it will stay vertical. It's not going to tilt. So if this F, the straight up and down part of the F, is vertical, it's not going to tilt. So the tendency is to make it go sideways or something. But now, and then the part that goes horizontally, that will follow the curve. So I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit, and I'm going to do capital letters. So here's the part of the T. This part will follow the curve. So that's why it's nice to have those guidelines. Vertical part of the R, vertical part of the E, and then these will follow the curve. So you see that's following that. And the same thing with this stripe. So if you have stripes on it, it's going to have that same curve. So I'm going to deal with this when I do my chocolate chip drawing. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is box-like forms. Anything that has right angles and is a solid box is going to deal, right angles and horizontal and vertical lines is going to have perspective. So when you're looking at something straight on, let's go back to this. If I was looking straight on at this, I would have what's called 1-point perspective. So here's the thickness of the cutting board, and then these two edges are heading off to one, what we call a vanishing point, which would be on my eye level. So I'm looking ahead at the refrigerator or the wall. So somewhere out here is a vanishing point that things would come. Now I'm exaggerating it a little bit. Now that's 1 point perspective. As soon as I turn it so that the corner is closest to me and not the edge, then we get 2 point perspective. So now I don't know why these papers have a fold in them, but they do. Now we have the corner, and we know that they're parallel with each other. This is parallel with this, but quite often when you see it from certain angles, it will look like these two lines are heading toward each other and would eventually come to a vanishing point out here. And these two lines, this one and this one, would look like, let's go a little farther out here, would look like they would eventually meet in another vanishing point, and both of those vanishing points are on one line, which we call the horizon line in a perspective drawing. Now, I don't want you to get into drawing vanishing points, but I do want you to be aware that this line and this line can either be parallel or they can head toward each other, like getting skinnier. But you never want to have them get farther away from each other like that. That will never happen unless this isn't a rectangle. So this and this will look like they're aiming toward each other, or else you can get away with making them parallel. If it's got a vertical section, like the corner, that will stay vertical. This back corner, vertical. Look at the side of the paper and make sure that it's the same direction as that. You won't see that one because it's hidden. So let's try this baking soda box here, or this Tazo tea box. And I'm going to put it at a 2 point perspective angle. So the first line I want to draw is the line that's closest to me, is that corner. And then you can use your pencil and close your eyes and kind of look at what that angle is. I say, okay, it's kind of like that from my viewpoint, and the camera is seeing it differently, but you might want to look at this. So I can use my pencil. And then I look at this and I say, okay, that's going in this direction. And then this would be the top, and I want to try, unless the box is all tweaked or something, these would be parallel, or else they could be going toward each other like that. But I'm just going to make them parallel because they're kind of close to me, but I don't want to make them look like they're going farther away from each other, like they would never meet. Okay, and then this top part would look like it's going toward that this other line, or parallel. And then I chop it off. This is going to be vertical. Now I have this top and this top. Now let's pretend this wasn't open like that, that it was just an unopened fresh box. And this would be then going at parallel or aiming toward each other like that. And the same with this. These two would be going either parallel or aiming toward each other as they go back. So what about the lettering? Lettering on the side would follow the same vanishing points. Okay, and this isn't quite right. I gotta that. So there's the guidelines for the lettering, and let's do 2 of them here. And these little lines right here would be going back to the vanishing point either also. So the B on the baking soda has a vertical part. The A is just kind of pretend there's a vertical right there. This is going to the vanishing point. Vertical, 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 its own little slant, vertical, and then I'm squeezing that in. this axis is kind of vertical. The O is kind of a vertical axis. You don't want it to look like that. Vertical. And that horizontal is going off. So I hope that helps when you're setting up your and I'll go ahead and, I haven't done it yet, but I'll attach this onto the Google Classroom. So this is a 1-point perspective where everything's going to 1 point, but I think this is the one we want to be dealing with, the 2-point perspective. Okay. Let's see here if that's okay. So I think that's all. I want you to practice doing your thumbnail sketches for your final design, for your final picture, and then practice some cylinders and 2-point boxes and ellipses on another piece of paper. So I'm going to stop this now, and I'm going to do a second one on my actual chocolate chip cookie drawing in just a moment.